we are reflecting on the life and legacy of Abraham Lincoln. A new docuseries, Lincoln's Dilemma, premieres tonight on Apple TV. It offers an in-depth look at Lincoln's complex journey to ending slavery and the rarely heard narratives of enslaved people. We know Lincoln was the so-called great emancipator, but there is much more to that history. And acclaimed actor Jeffrey Wright narrates this series. He sat down with our Ariel Reshef.
Jeffrey, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. What drew you to this project?
I love our history. I love the history of our country. And I love to dig down to discover those parts of our history that are much more nuanced, complicated, and interesting than we are often led to believe. And I think Abraham Lincoln's story is one of those. So this docuseries, 4 parts, tracks his journey from the beginning of his presidency to the end in a way that I think shines light in some corners that may have been previously darkened.
So what lessons can we extrapolate from this documentary, and how is that nuanced perspective helpful to understanding history?
Well, you know, I think we have this understanding of Lincoln that he was the great emancipator, he freed the slaves, and that's why we celebrate him. It's a little simplified. At the beginning of his presidency, he was anti-slavery, but only to an extent. He thought that if slavery preserved in the South would help preserve the Union, then he was all for that compromise. He was a man, and a white man of his times. He was burdened by the race prejudices of the time. But at the end of his presidency, we see him evolve. We see the war effort no longer being solely about unifying the nation, but also about emancipation. We see the ratification of the 13th Amendment. We see black soldiers having participated in the war in massive numbers. Over 200,000 black men participated either as soldiers or sailors. They represented 10% of the Union Army. So it wasn't just Lincoln alone.
Why is that history, that contextualized history, so important to study and bring to audiences nowadays?
Well, if we don't know our history, how can we know who we are today? We think of ourselves as divided, not nearly as divided as it was then. We saw images of the Confederate flag flown over the memorial to Ulysses S. Grant, the general who won the Civil War, paraded through the United States Capitol on January 6th. If you've really read the history, if you've understand the brutality of the institution of slavery, if you listen to Lincoln's words when he says that the Civil War, as brutal as it was equal to the brutality of the institution of slavery.
This documentary sheds new light on history that we all thought we might understand, but it certainly gives us new perspective. What did you learn by filming this?
Wow. You know, I've gained an appreciation for Lincoln, as Douglas describes, as, you know, an imperfect man, a white man, he says, of his times, but someone who ultimately walked the walk. And was as progressive as any president. He ushered in an expansion of rights to all citizens that informs who we are today.
You talked about Frederick Douglass's impact on Lincoln's thinking. What can we learn, and what can Lincoln's story teach us about man's ability to evolve in our thinking and the impact that that can have on generations?
Well, Lincoln was a thoughtful man. It was a thoughtful time. The one thing that I'm most struck about is the profound intelligence of these men and the seriousness of thought, the seriousness with which they write and with which they speak. He was a man who was described as being, you know, clouded in melancholy. And I think that ultimately led to his evolution too, and toward relative to his empathy for the suffering of black people in this under slavery. He was a man who was searching for the deeper meanings of humanity with himself, and I think he was a deeply patriotic man searching for the profound better angels that exist, as he described them, within our country.
Did his ability to find those better angels give you hope for our future, even in a divisive time?
Well, yes and no. It gives me hope because the history is there for the reading, for the taking in. I hope that our series, is helpful in reminding the audience of our history. But my hope is somewhat diminished because I'm not so sure how enthusiastic we are now about examining where we come from. We won't discover the lessons that Lincoln left us. We won't discover the lessons that Frederick Douglass left us if we don't search for them, if we ignore them.
Jeffrey, hopefully platforms like yours and documentaries like this will encourage the next generation to learn about our history, and we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Well, I thank you. Thank you for having me.
A pleasure.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.